Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. We are at the intersection of comics and politics, and this is your host, Ilana Levin, aka Twitter's Ilana Brooklyn. And this is a podcast for the sort of fans who think conversations about representation have to go deeper than litmus tests, and that whether or not someone enjoys a particular MCU movie is not an adequate litmus test for whether or not they quote-unquote support diversity in film. Oh my God, please just make it stop. Yeah, that's right. We're talking about the Eternals movie, a movie about whom I have nuanced opinions. And joining me, repeat guest, Brandon Wilson is a filmmaker and lecturer born and raised in Los Angeles. He attended UCLA, where he took a BA in African American Studies and an M.F.A. from the UCLA School of Theater, Film and Television. Brandon has directed 2 micro-budget features, 2005's The Man Who Couldn't, which is on YouTube, and Sepulveda from 2016, which is streaming free on Vimeo. Wilson has taught film analysis for filmmakers and introduction to editing courses at UCLA. He also teaches at Columbia College Hollywood, Los Angeles Valley College, NYU's Los Angeles branch, and Long Beach City College, where he teaches classes on auteur filmmakers, national cinemas, the essay film, and diversity in cinema. Welcome back.
It's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I feel like we were talking about this movie in advance, and you were one of the opinions I really wanted to get. And you're so definitely a Marvel completist, so there was never any question that you were going to watch it. But for me, I definitely was, I don't know how this is going to feel. And I basically watched this movie because I felt like it was my duty to do it for the podcast, which is not how I treat every Marvel product. Like you guys may have noticed, we haven't covered What If. Like, it is not my job to cover every Marvel product, guys. But I thought there would be an interesting conversation to be had around the movie as film, as like its place in the Marvel universe, its relationship to the Kirby comics, which you read in preparation for this, as well as the Neil Gaiman stuff with JRJR. Very interesting. And, I want to apologize, guys. This is definitely coming out after the bulk of the quote-unquote Eternals discourse has passed. But perhaps that gives us an opportunity to be more thoughtful. Or you actually watched the movie twice, so, you were even being more reflective about it. I would say, just as the jumping off point, I do want to give... Oh, right. I want to start off with some just brief spoiler-free analysis on, like, literally, should people bother to see this movie? Mm-hmm. And then we're going to keep that brief and then get into the real conversation. What is your take?
Well, I would say that you have to... Eternals is a very mixed bag, and I think that if nothing else, you gotta hand it to Marvel, and I always feel like I'm talking about a fascist regime or something when I say you gotta hand it. You gotta hand it to, and I do not by any means think of Marvel Studios that way, but you gotta hand it to them that for all of the guff that they take, and not necessarily wrongly for being part of the machine and sort of the sort of perfect embodiment of sort of corporate filmmaking. This is a very weird thing for them to do. It's a very risky project. There's just no way around it. Like, you can't really, this is not, if this was a corporate entity that cared about nothing but sort of maximizing profits for, the mothership, this is not what you would do. You would not do the Eternals by any stretch. So yeah, I think that it's a very interesting choice, and so I was very intrigued. I think like a lot of people, when the Eternals was sort of when it was announced, it was this kind of mix of like sort of surprise, and there's a certain and being intrigued, and then of course hearing who was taking it on, Chloe Zhao. So for people who, I think, in some ways, I would tell a lot of people to skip Eternals only because, it is in some ways for the Marvel completists. And yet, I think I kind of want people who don't really know Marvel well and don't like Marvel movies much. It's kind of important, I think, in some ways for them to see it because it sort of lays waste to this sort of cliche that Marvel, basically all Marvel movies are the same, and that's, you know, so much of the criticism of superhero movies, of comic book movies, are clearly leveled by people who don't really watch them and don't know them very well.
Yeah.
And they've seen one, and maybe they haven't seen one since the whole, you know, this whole project began, and they will take that to the grave, that this is the problem with them because I saw one time and I didn't like it. When of course it's sort of a diverse group of films, and there are some that really work well and some that completely conform to the stereotype, and this does not. I mean, for all the things you might have to say, and I got a lot of things I don't care much about for about in terms of Eternals. It's bold, it's definitely defies all the stereotypes of what a Marvel film is, and that doesn't necessarily make it good, but that certainly I think you have to respect the effort.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting experiment. I don't think that it went as far from the mold as it would have taken for me to be like super interested in it. Mm-hmm. It definitely was a movie that left me with lots to say and think and talk about. But I've seen, you know, plenty of better stuff this year, obviously. I think, like, if you're someone like me who doesn't see every single thing Marvel does, but sees most of them, I would put this in that definitely worth checking out category. But I'm not putting this in my, like, can't miss movie of 2021 list, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of rich conversation to be had around it, if that's something that you're here to do. Mm-hmm. And if you, like me, are coming at this as a huge Kirby fan, this is not doing the same things as him, but it's not like spitting in the memory of his vision. Like, this is not like my problems with, like, the Mr. Miracle comic series are much more extensive with their treatment of Kirby's work than this would be. Like, I don't think this is like, this movie is not doing the same things Kirby was trying to do, really, but it's also not like trying to destroy his premises or belief systems or anything. So, like, right. That's okay. And there's a couple of moments in it that have some, like, real Kirby to them, but this is definitely a different, I mean, guys, look at the art direction, right? Like, this is not the same boat. But there is a moment in this movie where there's a giant ass hand and a crazy space hat coming out of the ocean. And that's Kirby if you have ever seen it.
Yes.
So from here on, 100% spoilers 100% of the time. And I guess I will start with I mean, like, so you did enjoy the movie. Would that be fair to say?
I saw the movie the first time by myself, and I largely liked it. I thought it was a little slow in parts, and it felt a little long. Then I had to go a second time, taking my wife and my young child, to see it, and at a drive-in, I should add. And I enjoyed it a lot less, and it might be that it just doesn't hold up well to a second viewing. It might be that my wife was not enjoying it and really could not take a lot of the screenplay, and that the dialogue was weak. Or just, it just wasn't. And also, I think the drive-in is not perhaps the most optimal place for a film like this to see it. So I'm going. I don't. MCU films, only a few would I really call outright bad. Like I have upset a lot of film Twitter by saying that for a long time that I didn't think Marvel Studios had ever made an outright bad film. It may not be your taste, it may not be your cup of tea, but they were all pretty strong. This is the first year. This year, in general, I think that's changed. I think that Black Widow is pretty bad and uninteresting, and just I didn't care for it at all. I thought Falcon and Winter Soldier. There's a whole episode of us talking about that.
We talked about why that was terrible. Folks, go back and listen to that.
Yeah, that one's outright terrible. Black Widow, I get that some people enjoy it, find something out of it, get something out of it. I don't really see anyone gets anything out of Falcon and Winter Soldier. And I think it, raises the question that perhaps Marvel has begun to overextend itself, and that, there's just too much going on. They've, a lot of the first class, the sort of first wave of folks have departed. with Disney, now that they're expanding into Disney Plus series, I do sort of find myself wondering if this is, the whole thing is, the formula is sort of weakened because it's just spread too thin. And, they're trying to sort of do new things, and that's great, but the new things have to work. And I'm really finding this year that a lot of their movies and TV shows are very hit or miss for me right now. And I used to be all in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one thing that I'm really seeing is an interesting phenomenon. I have a lot of friends who during this COVID period really got into MCU stuff, which they hadn't really been following much before. And so I've been having this thing where, on the one hand, like all of the sort of Marvel nerds who certainly came at it from comics and have been following things from early on, we're at a moment where we're like really tired of the same old, and have maybe holding things to higher standards than we have had before. Meanwhile, there's like this wave of new people from whom I know, a lot of whom are women, who are just coming into this and have a lot of energy towards it and are really excited about it, and often excited about it in really interesting ways that I hadn't necessarily even foreseen, if you know what I mean. And so, like, you have half this, I mean, this is probably not 50-50, but you have a chunk of the viewership who are like, okay, guys, please tell me there'll be no more sky anuses, and like, you need to make stuff up again. I'm tired of like, actually, the villain is right, but he's going about it badly. Like, all of these sort of tropes are played out. Meanwhile, I have some friends who are newer and finding some really interesting things to say about the movies that they're watching, including ones that I'm a little bit bored of talking about or seeking out things. A good friend of mine, my friend who I went to see this movie with, Rena, she wanted to see Eternals because she loves Camille Nujani, and she also loved the Loki show. And when I told her about my whole thing about how Kingo in the comics is literally Toshiro Mifune, and so I think it's awesome that Jack Kirby is like, that actor, yeah, he's like an immortal and dying god. My friend went into this whole thing. She was like, oh my God, I think that's such a cool idea. Bollywood in some ways is like, it would be like the 2021 sort of film from other places that people in America are like excited to see. So it makes sense to transpose that there. And like, she was just all about being excited to watch this movie for Kingo, which is hilarious because like so many people have been saying before the movie, like, nobody cares about them. Like, actually, Camille Najani's got a fuck ton of fans,
Right.
So it was interesting sort of seeing these responses. I feel like I was really ready for a much bolder change and pivot, and I really wanted to see Marvel play with genre more in this. I felt like this movie was a lot of different genres without committing to them. Like halfway, like more than halfway done, I'm like, oh, is this supposed to be a whodunit? Because there's literally no tension.
Right.
I'm like, that would have been cool and have it be a whodunit, but I guess it's not. But, all appreciation to the lack of sky anus and to some of the inversions being different from what we've seen before. And, introducing a whole team of people at the same time is really fucking hard. You can only do so much. And she did produce some characters who I'm interested in. I mean, one thing that I will say that really struck me is the characters that Jack Kirby created that he clearly spent the most time and care and love on, like Cersei and, I would say especially Cersei, is not well served. And Thena, frankly, in some ways, is not well served by the movie. Like, not that well served by the movie, but I think the comics versions are more interesting.
Yes.
But the characters that Kirby just kind of did like a very brief one-off about and didn't really go deep into definitely benefited from the movie.
Yes.
Like, I love Markery. I love Druig. They're super interesting.
Right.
And then the characters that came after him, like Gilgamesh, I actually don't have as much familiarity with. But I thought like in some of the spaces where there just wasn't as much material to work from, the movie like did some interesting and cool choices with those characters.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the sort of, those sort of A-list Eternals, the ones who, clearly are sort of the leads in the original Kirby, it is interesting how much they were sort of sidelined by the story or just kind of blanded out a little bit and just not as interesting. Versus, Makari isn't in it a whole lot, but that she definitely is one of the people that makes a strong impression. I will say, and we're into the spoiler part, right?
Oh yeah,
Okay,
100%.
okay. I will say that the twist of that, where the sort of using Druig as a red herring, because you just walk in knowing that Druig is going to be sort of the Loki Maximus kind of like figure, who's the one who's going rogue, even though he has very good reasons for it. For them to turn that on its head and have it be Icarus be the one who is the problem. I thought that kind of saved the film.
Yeah.
Like if that hadn't been there, I would think I'd rank this lower. But that's a really interesting choice. And of course, it's like Marvel getting to play around with things like The Boys and part of the sort of bad Superman run of that we're so obsessed with these days, where what happens when the person who's sort of the best of the group, the most powerful, sort of, what if they go rogue and everyone has to now turn against them? But it worked, and I think that the fact that they're introducing a team from scratch allowed us to do something that kind of bold and daring. You're not going to have there's a very few number of geeks that are going to be really upset that Icarus has not turned out to be, the good guy. No one, it's not that, Eternals is not a title that inspires that kind of, there are people who know it and like it, but it's not something that people are that kind of obsessed with, which is great.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, I don't like no, this is not a complaint about Kirby's writing of the character Icarus that he invented, but like, I'm not particularly interested in the character Icarus in the comics. I think having him be the bad guy here was cool. And the movie absolutely conveyed in a very visceral way how completely terrifying and menacing his eye beams are. Like, that is one of the things that I thought it took really well from Kirby and made really physical, is that like, wow, those eye beams are fucking terrifying, and I do not want those anywhere near me.
Yeah.
Like, they conveyed that power really well. His figure sort of hovering off the page at an angle with the rays coming out of his eyes has always been really uncanny in the comics, and that definitely made it to the screen. And I think like his narrative made sense.
Yeah.
He's obviously wrong, but like but it's justified by the story. I definitely was disappointed. I felt like Selma Hayek was underutilized.
Yes.
I mean, she's wonderful. She also would have been great as comics version of Cersei, right? Like, it kind of broke my heart to like not have her, right? Like the super charismatic and like living her best life, Cersei of the comics.
Well, it's funny because Hayek and Angelina Jolie, both of them could have been Cersei, or would have been Cersei, in the 1990s or early 2000s. And yes, it's and you can see them and playing a Cersei more like the comic Cersei that we all love, that sadly is not in this film. But yeah, it is interesting seeing them now having sort of aged into sort of a the next sort of tier of the group. But yeah, Ajax, unfortunately, it's great that we have this 50-something Latina Arab woman in charge, but then it dawned on me very early on, or a while ago, that she's clearly not been very much of the film, just from the lack of there's not a diversity of scenes of her in it, and even her character, I thought, like her powers, I thought there was a lot of missed opportunity. I mean, yes, she's a healer, and I felt they leaned a little too much into sort of the Earth Mother thing, which it just I think it could have been a little more interesting than that. I mean, if she can heal, then that means that she can do organic matter what Cersei can do to inorganic matter, and that has a lot of very potentially cool / horrifying implications. And I would have liked to have seen her be a little more formidable, when Icarus takes her down, that should have been a little bit more of a we're not sure who's gonna win here. He seems to have he's got the sort of Thor sort of power, but I think that they could have done a little bit more with her. It's too bad. Although as I the second time I'm watching this, I'm realizing that there's a chance we'll see all these people, even the ones who died again, because they're and you know how Marvel Studios loves to bring people back, but it's not really them. It's like another version. It's another, it's them, but it's not them. It's the person you saw is dead, but this is another copy of them. This is another timeline version. So yeah, I'm sure we will hopefully get to see some of these. I have no idea what their plan is here. Clearly, there's going to be. They haven't announced that there's necessarily a sequel. I think we all assume there's going to be a series. I mean, and it's we don't know really how much they're going to be integrated in. And as you talked about in the podcast about the comics, it's very clear Kirby kind of wanted to keep this thing separate from the rest of that stuff and the rest of the, and I don't know. Yeah, we'll see how much they are integrated into the rest of the MCU. That's something else I'm noticing lately, is that I feel like the MCU is getting a little more decentralized, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily good. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe it is good that there's not as much overlap. There's not as much, we just had before Eternals, we had a movie with a nearly immortal bad guy. And the fact that there was no attempt to, put Athena cameo into Shang-Chi and to show that, Wenwu, his father, had crossed paths with an Eternal who recognized that, okay, you're not one of us, but you clearly are also, have tapped into something that gives you immortality. It's interesting that they're not taking advantage of that, or the Ancient One, or, it seems like they're a little bit more now about making sure that each thing is its own thing. And I'm curious where that influence has come from. I feel like it's grown as things have gone. And maybe now that they are such an established brand, there's not as much feeling that they need to do this sort of overlap that makes Marvel geeks squeal with glee. But it's interesting they didn't do a lot, or that they didn't try to seed in Eternals into anything sooner. I mean, it is very risky to just boom, here they are. Here's all 10 of them, but it just seems like that's the direction things are headed in, where things are a little more separate and more of decentralized group of independent states than this sort of united thing.
The problem is when you're starting with like 10 new characters, it feels like you're not going to be able to give in a 2 and change hour movie. You can't really give everyone their due, which means that almost by default you end up with a movie where you're like, look at this really diverse cast, except you don't actually spend time with the whole really diverse cast.
That's right.
Like, I love Marguerite, but as you said, she's not in a ton of it. My friend Felicia Perez, frequent podcast guest, political organizer and activist, also teacher. She had something that she said to me. We couldn't schedule it so everybody could be on at once, but she said to me something that I thought was really significant about Marguerite, which was, and this is my quote from her. They did a horrific job of silencing the deaf actor and character by giving them like almost 0 lines. They were the most like the audience, mixed race, young, and seeking more of a voice. And that's true. They were scared to, like, she's so charming and magnetic while she's on, but they give her so little to. I'm just really glad that she and Druig are in space together, and they're going to run into the Guardians of the Galaxy, presumably. But yeah, like it becomes, when you have so many people introduced at once, you end up spending a lot of time with some of these white dudes yet again.
Right.
And, one of the things I really wanted to comment about now, though, is before I saw the movie, I saw a number of people saying, the Eternals blames a black gay superhero for Hiroshima. And I was like, I'm going to withhold judgment and watch the movie before I determine if this is the case or not. Now, I will say that the reason that this is one of the lines that people have taken about the movie is because they don't give Fastos a ton of other stuff to do, be or say. Back to my point about when you have this very diverse team, but it's like 10 freaking people, you're not going to actually spend enough time with people.
Right.
But I want to be clear. Fastos blames himself for Hiroshima. The movie does not blame Fastos for Hiroshima.
Correct.
I think that's a very deliberate, at least I don't think so. I think it's a very cynical reading. Like, the movie should not have had him at Hiroshima. It's offensive. It's not handled with the gravity it needs.
No.
And it's like not treated as it could have. If it was up to me, I would have had it be like trench warfare with machine guns
Right.
and have him overlook saying that, because that's clearly about technology. Like, Hiroshima happened to Japan because of fucking, like, it's white supremacy, and you've just
Right.
written that out of it. And it's also genocide in a way that, like, the World War One front lines is an atrocity, but is not a genocide. Sorry, I
Yes.
seem like I might be talking over you. I don't know if you have thoughts
No,
about
no,
this.
no. I'm just saying yes, yes, yes. I agree. That was very clumsy and kind of weird. Just the sight of them just sort of walking around Hiroshima, like, it just, not to be cinema sins or anything, but it just, yeah, it was very clumsy and weird. I mean, I have mixed feelings about a lot of this sort of like. Yes, I get with the Eternals. Okay, well, let's back up a little bit. I think the first thing conceptually that I sort of didn't really care for is the sort of red herring that they are these space gods, that they are Olympia is a planet and they are not of Earth. What I love about Kirby is this idea that the Celestials come, they see our primitive ancestors, and they start doing things, and out of that comes three things, right? The deviants, the Eternals, and sort of man as we know him today. The idea that they're interconnected, and I miss that. I miss the fact that these are three, that the Eternals are of Earth. They are, yes, they're half alien, but they're not completely removed, and that's gone from the film. The idea that, and the deviants, of course, have being changed and not giving them a society and a sort of thing. Getting rid of the whole history, reducing them to just sort of these sort of beasts essentially that have to be wiped out. It's a real loss, and makes the film. It could have been just so much more complex and interesting, and it's simpler and easier. And even though it turns out to be a red herring that Olympia doesn't exist, and I don't know if it's just that they're tired of creating these sort of cities, the Golden City in Wakanda or Atalan or what, and maybe they're tired of that. They didn't want to have an Eternals city. But I miss that, and I miss the idea that the Eternals, that they're part of us, that there is they're interconnected. They're not just these aloof space gods who've hovered, in the background and occasion and hand us stuff too. And of course, you talked about it in the last podcast with the guests about the sort of the problematic sort of implications of assigning to much of human history the great advances to these space gods who hand people things instead of saying, no, people are just, especially non-white people, are just really ingenious and come up with these things on their own. It's all sticky. And so, these are things of adaptation that right away, having read the original source material, I just didn't really love those choices, that they made out right out the gate.
Yeah, I think that the movie didn't really resolve any of the potential ickiness about it, but it didn't make it any worse, at least. That said, one thing that folks really did tell me was that they appreciated, seeing places like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and, like big metropolises of like conquest of like genocide of Latin America, like seeing that brought to life on screen, which we hadn't really seen in that way before, was really powerful for a lot of folks. And I thought they were beautiful. So to the extent that it's something to like even show those spaces and fantasies, that is kind of cool.
I totally agree, and it really makes you think about how few films bother, how much our imaginations, how limited they are in terms of, not going to these places. And I know that's definitely why Ms. Zhao was hired, because of the, idea that she was going to be able to bring these places to life and really handle them and treat them the way she does, the reservations in her first two films and sort of the communities of the nomads and Nomadland. So there's definitely something to that. But of course, you kind of wish that a lot of that had been taken further, that, it had moved into, I think casting Zhao, another thing I would say about this in terms of where Marvel Studios is at is I think that this method they have of hiring people who are not genre folks, who are not necessarily veterans, who have like 20 films to their credit, maybe we're coming to the place where that's becoming a problem as well. And I don't just mean Chloe Zhao. I'm also talking about the writers. The writers are pretty green, and that's just, it is what it is. I mean, great for them. They're getting an opportunity. I think, they haven't had a lot of credits in the traditional sense. It's just not the way that movies usually like this are usually made. Usually people have to sort of make their bones, as they say in the mob, and really build up to something like this. And here, they're giving a rather complex narrative to, a group of somewhat untried filmmakers. And, I think that's some of those choices. I have to wonder if the fact that the movie so often takes the sort of easy way out with a lot of these questions and the narrative, how much of it is that the sort of inexperience of the filmmakers, in general, just their sort of inexperience. And Zhao, of course, a lot has been made about her, what she brings to it, and the fact that she's not someone who's particularly done action sequences and things like that, or even just worked with stars. I mean, the big problem here is that she is robbed of her the tool in her arsenal, which is to take people's lives and to have them bring their own life experience directly into the narrative. So it was interesting to see her not being able to work with that. And honestly, I'm not sure that in the absence of that, she really distinguished herself. Beyond some of the shots, it felt very much like her. In the exteriors, a lot was made of the fact that they went to the actual locations, they went to the Canary Islands, and so forth, rather than doing green screen, which is more the way these things are done. But when they, you hire Chloe Zhao, you're gonna do it her way. So yeah, I mean, and then of course she brought her own influences into it. She talked a lot about Terrence Malick and the sort of moments of a few moments that definitely felt lifted from there. And one of my things is I just feel like the real influence here, the filmmaker that I want to see someone channel and make Eternals is Pedro Almodovar.
Oh, jeez.
That's who I feel like has the sense of the camp and the sort of the weirdness and the sort of Cersei. I mean, Cersei is...
Yeah, I was going to say, Cersei is definitely an Almodovar character. I love it.
And that's the shame. That's the thing that I really mourned, and that's the thing that, and seeing it a second time only brought it more so. I mean, Cersei, and then you and your guests talked a lot about her and how kind of unique she is and special, and this was exactly what we all didn't want to see. They basically made her into this sort of earnest character who's kind of a bore, and there's just not much. They make her a phone addict. That's like the one, I feel like the sort of one. And for my people who are listening who are just watching the films, in the comics, Cersei is a very central figure in the Eternals narrative, but Cersei is, I hate to say influencer because that's sort of, it has such negative connotations. But she's a bon vivant, or whatever. I'm sure it's more bon vivant, I guess, the female version of that. She's a life of the party. She is someone who, she loves humanity. She loves fun. She likes to party. She's someone that you imagine winding up at the factory with Andy Warhol,
yes,
definitely. And telling everyone that she's an immortal and not being coy about it.
People will be like, sure you are, honey. You're really great, though, so we'll just keep with this.
Right. Maybe one person really believes her, right? And it's interesting too, and people have noted that with MJ, and the Mary Jane and the various live action Spider-Man, that the idea of these characters, female characters who are basically fun, we're very uncomfortable with that right now. We don't really know. That seems to be running afoul of feminism, and so we tend to turning her into this very, kind but earnest school marm, basically, was just felt wrong, and just felt, and just very obvious and sort of lazy. But that's where we're at, and I'm not saying that Gemma Chan. I'm not sure how she would have handled. It would have been fun to see her do the other way, but it's a shame that Cersei really kind of is just kind of ironed out so much, and all of the things that make her kind of unique are sort of are smoothed away.
I mean, the idea that a female character who is the life of the party is sexist is just actually sexist. Right. No, it's are you devaluing people who are the life of the party? Because I think that's actually a very valuable thing to bring to the table. Like, have you guys gone through COVID this year? I mean, maybe I'm speaking it because I'm a bit of an extrovert. Okay, I'm actually the world's biggest extrovert, but y'all need us, okay?
Yes.
So, but yeah, I thought some of the characters, it was. I don't know. It feels like there was so much that people were choosing to read into it that had to do with whether they wanted to see this movie as a reflection of whether a Marvel movie could be quote unquote real cinema or not. And I'm like, all movies are movies. I don't know what to tell you guys there.
Yeah.
But, Felicia told me that she actually had not been a big fan of Nomadland and had noted, in fact, I hadn't seen it. Felicia, she noted that the actual source material had a lot of people of color in it, and the movie suddenly didn't. So it's sort of interesting because I think people have this idea that inherently a creator of color is going to make sure that there's diversity in all spaces, but that's not necessarily so.
No, it is not. No, it is not. Yeah, no, and I'm not. I mean, and those of you who follow me on Twitter, that I'm very much a Chloe Zhao. I wouldn't say hater, but I'm definitely a skeptic about her. And there's a lot about Nomadland that I did not care for. You're taking an inherently political work and you're sort of scrubbing it all away so that you can tell the story about American free spirits, and the romanticizing this thing, which really should not be romanticized. As for her earlier two films, I'm not a huge fan of the writer. I find it a little. I find it somewhat exploitative. The writer, I'll just say it. I know that I'm in the minority here, and I know a lot of people were big fans of it. But the way that people who are disabled and who have suffered traumas, the way that they're showcased, and the way that that's sort of milked for emotion, just really makes me uncomfortable. And. So yeah, there's a lot about her that I'm personally, and I wanted to sort of check that at the door and just sort of give this movie a chance. And again, I don't think it's a terrible film. I just think that the inexperience of the filmmakers was very evident for me in terms of just very soft choices, just not strong ones, and keeping this a little too long. I think that maybe. Everyone was just given a latitude that maybe they needed to have reined in a little bit, and to make choices, to not be put in a position where they're introducing not just 10 characters, but this whole other this whole new cosmology or origin story. So, it has to be said that Chloe Zhao's really kind of put, as much as she fought for the position and for the job and really wanted it, this is a really it's not a really enviable position for a relatively young filmmaker, even one very successful, to be in, to have to introduce such a huge new element to the Marvel Universe in just one film, 10 characters in this whole new origin story. It's tough, and it's difficult. Also, she wasn't able to use a lot of her the team that she's used to. Specifically, I believe his name is Joshua James Richards, who last I heard was not just her cinematographer but also her boyfriend. It's very clear, that they go back together to NYU, and it's very clear that Marvel was like, yeah, no, thank you, and they gave her Ben Davis, I believe it is. Let me verify that. Ben Davis is the sort of house DP has become the house DP Ben Davis from London. He's sort of the house DP for Marvel. I think he shot Stardust, and he shot Layer Cake way back when, probably was like his first thing he did.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so he's sort of the house DP, and you'll notice that he shoots a lot of first films and then doesn't do the sequels, or he doesn't have a track record of being asked back by the director. So, like, he did the first Guardians, but not the second. He did Age of Ultron, but he didn't do the first one, and of course, he didn't go on to do any more. He did Doctor Strange and Captain Marvel, but he's not doing either sequel. So, it kind of feels like he's the guy they bring in because they know, look, he's not going to get nominated for an Oscar, but he knows what we want. And, I think it's too bad that she wasn't able to sort of work more with sort of her team. And of course, she edits her own stuff, and she didn't do that here. She had editors, one of whom was Dylan Titchener, who I can't remember if Dylan Titchener used to work with Paul Thomas Anderson or Wes Anderson, but one of the Andersons. So, it's definitely a test in some ways for her to sort of do her thing without her usual method and without her usual collaborators. So,
yeah. And listeners, by the way, there's a reason why this episode is coming to you super late. There's several reasons, but one of them is I was having tech issues. So this is me and Brandon doing a second recording session because I really loved our conversation and just wanted to close it out. But yeah, I felt like people really, from watching the trailers, everybody wanted to talk about how awful the cinematography was. And yeah. I was just so entertained because I was kind of like, now you realize this? Like, it doesn't seem to be any more egregious than most. And right. I don't know. Did you feel like it was just pretty bog standard?
Yeah,
enough to say.
I mean, it's pretty standard. I feel like it still felt like Chloe Zhao. There were still shots that felt like her work. All the exteriors and use of natural light and the sort of like magic hour kind of shots, the longing looks between Icarus and Cersei. I mean, that felt like her. So that again. I hate to spoil spoil a good narrative here, a good evil overlord narrative, but, I think that it's a little bit, people get a little bit hyperbolic when they are attacking Marvel as this sort of soul-crushing, widget factory. I mean, these people are doing... People are, whatever the flaws may be with the film, I don't think it's because the filmmakers are being crushed utterly. I mean, yes, there are people who, like Edgar Wright, who have to part company because their vision is just so divergent. But, I don't think that the weaker films in this series, it isn't because they took some really dynamic filmmaker who does something and then the film is completely unrecognizable. It might just be that this, they didn't get to work with maybe the collaborators they wanted to, or, there might be some issues. I'm not saying these are all perfect films by any stretch, but I don't think you can just say that it's because Kevin Feige likes to sit back and, fantasize about making great filmmakers, turning them into TV directors. I mean, these people are getting a chance to express, to sort of bring themselves to it. I think that he would be foolish to ignore that the biggest successes he's had, like Guardians of the Galaxy and Black Panthers, because the filmmaker was able to actually bring something of their DNA and,
right.
put it in there and make it personal and make this, clearly their work. So,
well, the thing for me is like, I'm not asking any movie to be loyal to Jack Kirby's aesthetics, but if you're going to not do them, offer me something really compelling and interesting and different. And I felt like I didn't find the aesthetics to be interesting or enough to make me feel like I was not expecting them to look like anything from the Kirby art, but if you're not going to do there, like offer me something that like will make me say, you didn't do this, but you did that, and that's cool. But it was like, and like I said, like there's amazing things like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, but I wanted to be more, if they were gonna not do my guys' stuff, I wanted them to really show me why they were going with a different direction. And I feel like it's still partially this like, well, we need to make things darker or else they're not realistic. When it's like, guys, nothing about this is realistic. Why? This is, no one came here for that. And it's not really helpful. I mean, one of the things that I felt the movie conveyed extremely well, actually, that, like Icarus is just shooting eye beams from his head, hovering menacingly above the ground at an angle, like is actually even creepier in the movie than it is in the comics. It's also not supposed to be creepy in the comics per se. It just is. So shout out for that. But yeah, I was hoping for a little bit more of a look, and I did think like there was I know we were both disappointed in how the deviants were portrayed, but there was something beautiful to them, and I liked that the human. God, there's so few humans that they have us in there to be invested in, but that Kingo's human assistant was the guy's like, no, that's actually really beautiful, and it was kind of a nice little call attention to people that like, yeah, these monsters, they are beautiful.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not Crow. They're not they don't have my boy Crow, but yeah, they're beautiful.
No, I could have lived with the design. The design wasn't the issue. It just, I actually completely get that the why they made the change from the comics. And right, you don't expect it to be Kirby. And I completely agree that they didn't offer anything super compelling to replace it with. Just sort of another dysfunctional family sort of story with a lot of sort of neo-realist gestures in terms of some of the approach here and there, which is an interesting choice. But yeah, I agree that, and it is of course interesting that Thor Ragnarok actually went very Kirby and went very strong in that direction.
It can be done.
Yes, it can be done. Right. But clearly that was not the vision that they had for it, and that is what it is. I mean, they decided to go in a slightly more realistic direction with this very unrealistic story.
But I think one of the things that we should talk about in terms of like this material, like what it does want to talk about, and which is different than some of the other stories that have been in the Marvel films before, is that it really is about this question of non-intervention, right?
Yeah.
Like before the movie came out, everybody's saying, yeah, like if they were around, if the Eternals were around, during the Holocaust, during various genocides, why didn't they do anything to stop it? This completely breaks the world of the movie. I'm like, actually, no. The movie explains to you why. And like, it shows this to be a failing of theirs and asks you to ask them the question of to do better. Like the movie positions, these characters have been told by the person who they believe to be God, basically, that they should not interfere. And they took that to heart because they literally believed this to be the word of God. Right. They should have questioned that. They should have interfered. They should have questioned that. And so again, I just sort of think like this is one of those other moments where I'm like, I think this is why I don't offer feedback on trailers, really, because I think people's cynical readings of that led to some just discourse around the movie that ended up not being related at all to what the actual story is telling. The story is like, yeah, they didn't do anything. That's fucked up, guys. That's one of the things we're making a point about. And one of my like few real schadenfreuds I had watching people's reactions to the movie was on in one of the Jack Kirby had Facebook groups I'm in. Somebody in Spain wrote about how offended he was that the movie just sort of holds that the conquest of Latin America was genocidal because there's more Indians there now than there were before. And I'm like, the fact that this fucking racist in Spain is really upset about being called out on their genocide, that's something that makes me happy a little inside. I'm not completely dead. If racists are angry, I'm not going to be dead inside in response to that little moment. Like, yeah, some superhero stuff on the screen called that genocide. That's nice. But yeah, like it's really a story about like people just following orders and then like questioning that hegemony and questioning if that's really what they're supposed to do. So in the end of the day, like I do think like the main offensive fuck up thing is being in Hiroshima. I mean, I don't I don't know. And I guess I do still sort of go back and forth about any source material in which the great achievements of humankind and populations of people that are non-European are like in any way possibly ascribable to gods is always a little like
yes, always.
Wince. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, what did you think about that theme as being the theme for this?
I thought it worked fine, and I'm a Trekkie, so I'm already like, right, let's get at that, right, the whole non-intervention. that it sounds like a good idea, and that the moral, the inevitable moral questions that come up with choosing not to interfere with these kinds of things. I thought that worked fine, and it also did a great job informing the characters and how their individual reactions to that reality. And it set up Druid very nicely, and
yes,
you very much empathized with him, that his frustration that he could stop this, but he's not allowed to.
And they do address that this goes too far. Like it's about you have to strike a balance, Like,
right.
Yeah.
Right. So
actually, this might be the only time that a superhero movie has made you need to strike a balance point, and it didn't result in me being angry because
right.
of it being like a moderate position.
Right.
So I'll give it that too.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think for what the film tries to do, it is moderately successful. I think, however, you can't know this material without realizing that it could have gone further and been bigger, and just, and I feel a certain amount of conservatism coming from Marvel lately, where they don't want to, it's like they feel like, okay, we snapped away half of existence, we delivered on this conclusion, and I think there very clearly is some fear, at HQ about, the inner circle, like how do you move forward, when I think a lot of people took Endgame to be the end. Like, okay, great, no more Chris Evans, no more Robert Downey Jr., well, that was fun, let's move on. And I think that there's a feeling that they don't want to really alienate the casual viewer with a lot of, backstory at this point, and it's like, let's keep them coming. Let's give them something new, which again, you got to give it to the Marvel Studios that they this is not a corporate kind of decision to make a movie like this. But yeah, I think that the desire to sort of make something that's not too out there, that's not too challenging, is kind of just making them sort of keep to the middle of the road slightly with their ideas. I mean, not in everything, of course, but I definitely feel with Eternals there was definitely clearly well, let's not make it too weird. Let's not make it too out there. I'm really surprised and a little disappointed that we didn't get into this explaining why certain people get exposed to gamma radiation and they become the Hulk rather than dying.
Yeah. I mean, because like the Inhumans and the Terrigen Mists, like the Marvel has the bones of that kind of stuff in it that could be used to. That's a good point.
Exactly. And that what are the ramifications of this kind of, clearly if you got Inhumans and they are out there, they're amongst us, can they procreate? They certainly can in the comics, but can they procreate with people? On that, of course, and then that leads to a lot of questions. So, I just again, there is sex, albeit briefly, in this, which must be noted for all the people who complain endlessly about the sexlessness.
But it's like it wasn't sexy, so it was just like,
no,
are you just doing this to check a box? Like, please,
It does feel a bit like, well, they've been saying this, and maybe Chloe Zhao knows that this is a thing that people say, and so she's like, well, I'm gonna do it, and they're gonna do it, and but yeah, it wasn't the most, I mean, it's about as much as you're gonna get in a PG-13, and it certainly wasn't terribly passionate. And yeah, there's a lot. And of course, having Fastos be married to a man and have a kiss. But yeah, I mean, so they're trying to do some things, and again, that's not necessarily the people who are sort of predisposed to being anti-Marvel at this point are not gonna be terribly moved by any of it. But I guess there was an attempt made. It just all feels.
An attempt was made.
Yeah. It all feels very conservative.
But I also think but things that are coming from corporate, I kind of suspect that one of the reasons why the movie introduced 10 Eternals instead of 5 or 6, which is probably what you want, is because they they wanted to introduce some diverse characters, but they also wanted there to be white men. And so if you want there to be white men and like a Hollywood actress, white woman star like Angelina Jolie, and you also want to bring some diversity in, next thing you know, there's 10 characters.
Yes. And and you're killing a lot of people of color.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I do think
Yeah.
that this was like, the cast is large for diversity, but not in a good way. Like,
Right.
the good way would be to just not have as many white men and to have more substantial roles for the characters of color you created.
Right.
Like,
Right. Who and you know, again, a lot of them are quite popular. I feel like
Yeah.
as we said earlier, like Makari in many ways was kind of one of the breakouts, and I hope
Yeah.
we see more.
I mean,
of
it's going
her.
to be fun. Yeah, it's going to be her and Druig and Guardians is going to be has the potential to be very cool. But like if not, and the actor who plays Druig is fantastic. But like if the cost of like not having an overpacked new team means like we don't have him, we have like, and so there's more interesting work to be done with Gilgamesh instead, like so be it. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
you have to cut something, and maybe you need to cut white men this time, guys. Maybe. What did you think of Angelina Jolie's performance and her whole thing?
Yeah, I wasn't thrilled. I mean, look, it's we haven't even seen Angelina Jolie. Like, forget about her entry coming into the Marvel universe. We just haven't seen her very much. In the last 10 years. And so it was great to just see her on screen. And of course, I mean, she's kind of perfect for someone who's believable as this sort of, not quite of this Earth space goddess. She certainly seemed to have some fun. The choice to give her the sort of PTSD, obviously that kind of limited her. It's very interesting that Cersei, I just feel like normally Thena would have clearly been sort of the lead character, especially if she didn't have to contend with this condition. She's just sort of, if you're looking at right now which of them is going to break out and possibly join the Avengers, and I have no idea that that's what they're going to do at all. But I mean, Thena clearly is the one who's you would expect to be the leader of the team or the second in command after Ajak, and so going with Cersei is interesting, and again, we've already sort of litigated and talked about her. And sort of, they instead choose to sort of do the thing with Cersei, where she possibly has a lot more power that she hasn't really tapped, and has the potential to become the most powerful of all of them, etc. So I think I echo what most people have said about Jolie is that it's nice to see her, but it all felt kind of like you still felt like she wasn't there. Her presence, as well as Salma Hayek's presence, felt like it could have been bigger, and
absolutely, like if you're gonna have those two, like please use them, right? But, I like my friend Felicia Perez, who I referenced earlier. She had a great take on Thena, which was that she liked that being the white woman who's the one who's like stuck reliving the trauma of the terrible things she's done. Like she's like struggling with her memory of the terrible things she's done. She's like, I like that being the white woman character who's carrying that burden. I'm like, yeah, that's a very good point. Right? I'm like, that is interesting. I like it. So is there anything else we want to cover, or you think we got it? Oh, I was going to ask you about the way they're seeding like the upcoming Blade stuff. I mean, I'm not a big person for talking about stuff before we know much, but if you have anything you want to talk about for it, go for it.
Yeah, I thought that I felt like the Dane Whitman, this is again the kind of thing people really roll their eyes with Marvel, as like kind of slipping him in there, and the obvious sort of like name recognition from Game of Thrones, and him being reunited with his former brother, on-screen brother. I mean, it's too early to tell. It didn't bother me as such, but it didn't add much. I didn't really get the point of just having Blade's voice, except that maybe they're not ready to reveal much about him. The fact that it appears that Blade will be working with the Black Knight, well, okay, that's interesting. It's way too early to tell. I mean, I think Blade's going to be interesting because already people have their knives out no pun intended, because they know this is not going to be what the previous Blade was. This is not going to be R-rated. This is not going to, this is going to be PG-13. This is going to be only go so far. And Blade, Wesley Snipes' Blade is pretty beloved. And even I admit, even I was very kind of bummed out, because I was kind of always, in my head, Blade was already canon in the MCU. I just always told myself that this was the MC, this is the 90s while Tony Stark's partying, not too far away. Blade is just underground. Blade is hacking vampires. And, I always kind of hoped that Snipes would come back. Now, Snipes, has his issues and his baggage, and I think, and of course he's older, and they decided to recast instead, which Wesley is clearly cannot even pretend to not have feelings about. So that's going to be a very interesting, for a lot of levels, and then moving into sort of a horror type thing. Although, So, and it's again too early to tell. It'll be kind of amusing to see Kit Harington, swinging another magic sword around. But hey, it's I understand why you cast him that way.
I like him. It just struck me now, and now I'm horrified again. I'm breaking my own rule about speculating, but oh fuck, if they make this into a black cop, white cop, buddy cop kind of situation, I will be likely unamused.
Right.
Despite having great affection for both actors, I'm like, please don't do that to me.
I can just see the camera whipping around them as they're back to back with their swords, ready to go to cut down all the undead that are lunging at them. When I realized that he was so the Black Knight coming in, with his sword, and Blade with his. So that's a way to go. And it's funny because I do the Black Knight does register with me, because I was an 80s comic book reader, and he was a pretty big 80s Avenger. So when I started reading it, he was one of the sort of stalwarts in the Janet Van Dyne's era, and also Monica Rambeau when she was captain. So I have some.
So for newer listeners, For newer listeners who don't know the old comics, Captain Marvel, the black woman Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau, was in charge. She was chairwoman of the Avengers in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So, that's a thing that happened before, okay, guys?
Yes.
And a non-hyper-powered, a white woman who's a bit of a party girl also ran the Avengers back in the day, Janet Van Dyne. So the fact that we haven't had a woman running the Avengers yet in Marvel movies is backwards of where the comics was decades ago.
Another example of the party girl who must be turned into a nerd, because that's feminism, because I mean, we don't even know anything about Janet Van Dyne, and I hope we get to see a bit of her in the next Ant-Man. But it's that's her character, and she's kind of unrepentant, and you still respect her, and she's still a leader, even though she's a rich girl who likes to buy things and likes to party. But this is not the way, and we'll see. But I mean, all these movies are just getting so overcrowded. I mean, I just heard Benedict Cumberbatch almost making a joke about feeling like a guest star in the Doctor Strange movie, that is supposed to be his second go round, and also they've waited so long for these guys to get their second film, Black Panther, and all the issues that's come up with that, and Doctor Strange, and they're overpacking these movies so much. They're introducing so many characters that I do fear that we're never going to get a trilogy that really satisfies. I feel like Iron Man's got the best trilogy, even as much as you might hate the second one, and the third one's polarizing. But I mean, there is an arc. He is one character in the first film, and he is another guy at the end of the third film. And even Captain America's trilogy kind of got stepped on, because it has to kind of become an Avengers film, and the third one. So I feel like this is becoming a problem, and we'll see how it rectifies. But the introduction of the multiverse is just kind of potentially opening up a big, again, this overcrowding problem, because it's like they're so scared now about, you know, keeping us hooked with spectacle, but at the cost of character and at the cost of all the things that I think are equally compelling, maybe more so for those of us who grew up with the characters. But, you know, it's, yeah, I'm a little concerned there for them.
And with that, thank you for joining us again. Tell our listeners where they can keep up with your work.
Well, I pop up here and there, but the best place to find me is on Twitter under the moniker Genius Bastard. It's a film school in-joke. I don't think of myself as either. Genius Bastard, one word, on Twitter. So if you find me there, you'll definitely find everything else I'm doing out there.
And I, of course, am on Twitter a little bit too much, ELANA_Brooklyn. Forthcoming, we'll be having coverage of Young Justice, the animated show that just continues to delight, season 4, and we'll be having the finale of Doom Patrol on the show. I have interviews coming up with Tina Horn, who'll be back to talk about SFSX. Safe sex. I can never quite pronounce it right, but they're very exciting to have a whole graphic novel set in that world back with me again. And Steph Williams, who's writing the amazing Nubia comic for DC, will be joining back to talk about her book as well. And so this is Graphic Policy Radio, and that is why we say keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.